Name's Connor Smith. I'm an associate at Ballard Spahr in their Minneapolis office, and I think, in my fourth year now. Before I started working with advocates for human rights, I really didn't know much about human trafficking. I don't think I realized how serious of a problem it was and what the system we had in the US to help people who had been trafficked into this country. Before I started working on an immigration project, I didn't know anything about the relief, the different visas, the programs. I had no prior experience with T visas specifically, issues of trafficking, really immigration generally. But being able to use my abilities and my years in school, my experience to really make a change in someone's life, like completely change their life, is so rewarding in ways that, money or bonuses can't really cover. Advocates for Human Rights provides incredible support, and the training is very easily accessible. I had so many questions in my first months working on this project, and every time I ran into a wall, I could reach out to advocates and somebody would respond, usually the same day, at least within a couple of days, with the right answer and the next answer to the question I was going to follow up with. When I started out, I hadn't really worked with any victims of trauma, but Advocates for Human Rights offered resources and other agencies offered resources on trauma-informed interviewing. And over time, just developing a relationship with this person, they become more comfortable, I become more comfortable, we're able to talk about things that they might not otherwise have said on a first meeting, and get the full story. I worked with some other agencies that provided support for my client. In particular, in Minneapolis, the International Institute was able to help coordinate just logistics, get him to meetings, get him to interviews, provide materials to him, confirm that he was safe, that sort of thing. My client applied for this job in the United States with supposedly an agency in his home country. And the person he worked with demanded payment in order to get the application through, to go to the embassy and apply for his visa, to attend these trainings. And it was a pretty hefty sum. My client had to borrow money from family and friends to get it paid. When he arrived in the United States, he was immediately shuffled off to a completely different city from where he expected he'd be. I mean, he's from tropical climate and ended up in South Dakota in the middle of winter. When he was paid by the trafficking organization, his former employer, they put the money onto a card that didn't have his name on it, that didn't have any record connecting to him. We found out later that they were underpaying him a lot based on the original contract that he signed. More than that, they restricted his movement. They kept him from contacting family. They kept him even from seeing a doctor at some points when he was injured, which I think are common things in trafficking situations. I mean, the client was working in rural areas with limited access to transportation, couldn't, for instance, go to a store when he needed to, was dependent on the trafficker for food, and then was forced to work on these really kind of dangerous construction projects, which would be dangerous at any time of the year, but sub-zero temperatures, icy roofs, and limited safety equipment. And then he sought out help and eventually ended up with the advocates. And initially we worked with the Department of Labor, which is usually, I think, the path that people will go through, although every case is different, right? Once we had kind of exhausted our options with the Department of Labor, or at least hit a snag, Advocates for Human Rights recommended that we reach out to criminal investigators as well. I worked with my client and the FBI through an interview and multiple exchanges of information to get his story out and to help the FBI, frankly, conduct their investigation of the trafficking organization. They were aware of the organization, they'd received other complaints, and so they were very excited to have somebody appear in person and be willing to tell their story and ultimately perhaps testify. My client and I don't speak a common language. He speaks Spanish, I don't. So I had to work through an interpreter. But even through an interpreter and through kind of broken, obviously Google translated messages that he could send. He came across as so sincere, so hardworking, and very diligent. He's a great person. I mean, I'm so happy, honestly, that he's a resident now in the United States, because I think he's going to make things better for all of us. So my client and I met in person just twice. We met once to go to the FBI interview. When we finally met again was after we'd received word that his T visa was approved. And he came, I think, within a couple of days to my office. We met outside. I mean, we hugged, we shook hands, we spoke through his cousin who could kind of interpret. And it was really one of the best points of my career to see somebody, like their whole life was changed by that moment, and all the work that they'd put in for almost 2 years paid off. It would be very difficult for somebody who's a victim of trafficking to get the same results that I achieved and that my client achieved without the help of an attorney. The system is complicated. I can't imagine somebody who has limited English and limited education managing their own way through the T visa process. Talking to another attorney about taking on a trafficking case, I'd have a couple things to say to them. First, it is not nearly as scary or as daunting as it might seem, right? The stakes are very high for this person, but two, you will really make a difference in somebody's life. Most of the time in our careers as lawyers, we might win a case, we might get a settlement, we might close a deal, and that changes people's business careers, their business trajectories. But by helping somebody who's been a victim of trafficking, you not only give them an opportunity to remain in the United States on a T visa and perhaps ultimately pursue a green card if they qualify, but you give them vindication for what happened to them. You help them get a small part of justice that so often people in similar positions just can't get. I think any attorney, regardless of practice area, can work on an immigration case. The skills are what everybody needs to be an attorney: organizational skills, getting things in on time, paying attention to details. I think working on an immigration case has helped my skills in other areas of my practice as well, particularly getting a bunch of documents organized and turned in on the right time. It's something everybody needs to do. More than that, though, I learned how to communicate with a whole new set of people and gain a better understanding, or a better way to empathize with clients after my experiences working with somebody who's from a totally different background than me.